Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Rogue Health Economist. Today it's just me, and we're going to be talking about a trauma-informed transformation of healthcare. What a week to be alive. It's been a very interesting week. I'm sure wherever you are in the world, you've been tuned in to just a kind of a dramatic outpouring of emotion that has been happening. 6 weeks ago when I set up the vision of the Rogue Health Economist, we said that this was going to be trauma week. And whether I was feeling it, or whether I was looking at the astrological symbols, or whether it just so happened, this is probably like one of the most traumatic weeks, I think, in human history, especially for Americans. And I guess I just want to start by saying first, just to honor the land that I'm sitting on as the tribal land that I'm standing in right now in Sacramento, and wherever you're watching this, the land that you're sitting on, and the original owners of the land. I also want to share that this week I've been doing a lot of listening to all kinds of different voices from across the spectrum. And I haven't posted anything on Instagram this whole week. I've done a few interviews about trauma-informed care. I missed my Tuesday interview with Mastin Kip as of respect for Blackout Tuesday. And Mastin is one of the people that's been speaking about trauma and trauma-informed care for a long time. I guess I wanted to take this opportunity to just speak from the heart and see if it resonates for people who are in our community, people who watch this and listen to this show, people who have followed my work in the functional medicine community, and just to share a little bit about my experience of this week, what I think is my role to play, and also, what I think we need to honor. So you may not know this, but I actually grew up in apartheid South Africa, right? So up until age 11, I'm spending almost half my time in South Africa, up until age 6, full time. And I lived in a spiritual community. And one of the things about that is interesting about that is, the context was the end years of apartheid South Africa, which was, a pretty crazy time, right? You can tell that the powers that be that had dominated the local populations there for a few generations was now kind of fighting back. You had de Klerk, who had come in, who was interested in maybe seeing things anew. You had the fall of communism that was like happening simultaneously. And it was really interesting because, I was living in that, and yet here I was in a community of mainly white people that was breaking the rules when it came to apartheid, and actually inviting Black people from South Africa and also from across Africa to some of the events that they were doing, breaking the rules as far as letting Black people stay in the white areas, in the community that we were in. And then I would also get to visit rural Black communities where they seem to have like a level of like happiness and togetherness that I had not seen. Just the rituals and the dancing and the energy and the community. These were extremely happy people in a situation where, you would not necessarily think that these people were happy if you just looked at their like gross domestic product. But they were, they were happy, and they were connected to themselves. They were connected to each other, and they were connected to nature. And, there was so many layers of experience, through that I think informed the beginning of my journey. Now, fast forward to, 15 years later, and I'm in London, and I had my first job as an investment banker. I had my training in health economics. I've sort of started to like be interested in health and healthcare. I have this weird upbringing where I'm seen, I'm under the care of holistic practitioners. A big part of the community that I grew up in was energy healing and nutrition, and everyone's seeing the chiropractor, and it was the early days of the integrative medicine movement, and I was just in it, and I didn't realize that it was weird until I went to school and realized no one thought the same as me or others or otherwise. In those years, if I'm honest, like in a desire to be accepted by groups. I can look back at behavior with regard to race that I'm not proud of, right? Everyone, I think, is trying to assimilate into and get friends and be accepted, and there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of like xenophobia that exists. Add into that a little bit of 9/11, and there's a lot of really like ugly stuff that we've all been witness to. I've had a sort of an interesting, one of the things that I've had is an interesting connection into different layers of people of color through playing cricket, right? So in Connecticut, I played cricket, and there was like West Indian, like Caribbean black guys who had teams, and then there was like Indians and Pakistanis and Bangladeshis that had teams, and my team was kind of a mixture of the rest. So I had a sort of intro into that. I was the only white guy in the Connecticut Cricket League. And then also I'm fully immersed in healthcare and seeing, in the same way that, in South Africa, like the white minority had sort of overwhelmed the black majority, and that they were like, pushing down and facilitating a lot of trauma. On the other hand, you'd see that in medicine too, in that like the type of medicine that have been part of cultures for generations, Native American culture, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, these 5,000 year traditions of health and healing, of how people created health, was sort of being dominated by Western medicine. And that ultimately, there was a lot of trauma in the integrative medicine community, licenses being taken away, people being, like health being destroyed by pharmaceuticals or, by addiction, all of these types of things. And so this is all, happening in my experience. And ultimately, just started to, I guess the reason why I came to choose to work in healthcare, and the moment that set me on this path, was a realization, like, we got a lot of problems. I mean, sit around and talk with anyone this week. I mean, if you've been having conversations with Black people, people of color, other white people this week, if you spent any time on any social media, like, there are a lot of problems. They are complex. They are layered. Things sit on other things. Solutions even more complex and problematic. And, I've been on this journey now for 15 years to try and understand, like, what is the root cause of chronic conditions in healthcare, and, and what is the root cause of the cost of healthcare costs going up, and how can we arrest those costs? And ultimately, the problem is vast, and, and is intersectional between planetary health and social justice and other health. And so this week I've listened to a lot of different people. I want to give a shout out to my buddy Caduce, who I spoke to on Monday, and Kelly Gray Meisner I spoke to today, and my whole team at Fine Functional. We had an incredible conversation this morning about where we are in the world and what we're doing. And I guess I just want to start by saying, like, people who know me and know what I'm into and know what I've done, the vast majority of them want me to keep doing it. And they feel like, my buddy Kadu said to me earlier this week, he said, like, you're doing the Lord's work. I mean, getting people to be healthy, getting people to come into really understanding their own sovereignty, getting people to, facilitate a journey where they can be healthy and they can then help other people be healthy, building communities of people that support each other to be healthy. Like, this is the work, like, this is necessary, and whoever's engaged in that work needs to be supportive. And I feel grateful to people who have shared that. It's very similar. Like, if you look back, you might in the end of apartheid, you might think that might be the perfect time to be like, hey, white people, stand down. This is the Black people's time. And yet, here was the community that my parents were involved in, really creating, opportunities for discussion, really creating opportunities for integration between Black and white, and actively involved every day in kind of ending systemic oppression. And I feel like, in a certain way, what is happening in the integrative, functional, naturopathic world is that we're kind of coming to this moment where we realize that we're trying to end the systemic oppression that's existed in our community too. And part of that is the fact that, you know, that this is a moment where everyone's seeing that there's sort of like a transformation occurring, and it's kind of like a birthing process, and it's painful, and we're not really sure what it looks like, and we're not really sure how to react, but we know that we want something better and different and new. And maybe this is an opportunity for that to emerge. So the first thing that I want to say is about chronic disease, right? Because chronic disease is the thing that is taking the healthcare costs in this direction. It's the thing that's going to bankrupt every major economy unless we do something about it and we do things differently. And I guess I just want to honor the fact that a lot of people have referred to chronic disease as like lifestyle-driven chronic diseases. But the truth is, for many people, like, this is not a lifestyle choice. For some people it is, right? But for many people, it's not a lifestyle choice. It's an environmental issue that they can't afford to avoid. Like just this week, we're taking calls at Find Functional. We heard from a woman and we were like, oh, you've got to you've got to prioritize your sleep. And she's like, yeah, I'd love to sleep 8 hours a night, but I don't have a bed. I don't have a bed, right? So for most people, most doctors, people in healthcare can't even imagine what it's like to not have a bed. And yet we're telling people, you got to get 8 hours of sleep. You got to, calm down the nervous system. You got to get into parasympathetic response. And all of that is true. And yet, when we look at the difference in outcomes between black and white, we start to realize that like health unmasks the underlying things that are happening in society. As an example, in my book, Community Cure, I talked about centering pregnancy. So centering pregnancy is essentially showcasing that by putting groups of women into cohort groups to have them like discuss their pregnancy pre and post pregnancy, if you do that, if you put people in groups, it reduces preterm birth by 35%, which is a huge outcome. And it gets even better outcomes in places where you have really terrible health outcomes, where, like in places like Mississippi and South Carolina, where the outcomes for black people and the outcome for white people are so disparate. And just by putting people in community, you can even those things out, and ultimately you see that the community has a huge power there. Now, ultimately, when we look at even like deaths from COVID, right? And we look at the outcomes of people with chronic disease, and it's like, okay, well, look, people who are poor and black people especially have way worse outcomes when it comes to COVID, because ultimately it's just unmasking like unhealthy bodies are more likely to die. You have way less immune resilience. And, for some people that's a lifestyle issue, but it's not really lifestyle. It's systemic oppression, turning itself into health or health numbers. And you see that with things like type 2 diabetes, dialysis, all of these areas. I mean, there are so many layers of the problem, and they're so interconnected. If you're a black person living in New York, like the chance of you getting arrested, proportionally is way higher. So do you have high blood pressure because of the McDonald's you're eating? Or is it because you're like worried that you're going to get thrown in jail any moment? And these kind of like the trauma that is happening to people of color in this country is driving these health outcomes that are driving chronic disease, that are driving these costs, that are leading to this like ever expanding costs. And the white people love it because they own the kidney dialysis center and they own the hospitals and they own all those kind of things. But I generalize in these areas, but then you have to understand the nuance in the same way that I said of what was going on in South Africa, where there are people all around and there are tons of people inside the integrative functional naturopathic medicine communities who are really, doing this because they want to see health equity. Over the time, I've had the opportunity to go to Institute for Functional Medicine and the Academy for Integrated Health and Medicine and Integrative Medicine for the Underserved and the American Association of Anti-Aging Medicine. And they all have their own ways that they interact with these, these kind of concepts. Like at AIHM, at the beginning, they recognize the land that we're standing on, and they really make an effort to think about intersectionality and planetary health. And it's good to see that more organizations are starting to really think in those terms. The truth is, we are filling up almost every human with ungodly amounts of trauma. White kids, black kids, especially, Black kids where they don't have fathers and they live in economically disadvantaged areas. There is a lot of trauma happening in those places, and that trauma drives the health outcomes. And there are all kinds of issues, and I'm sure you've seen them all, and they're all layered on top of each other, and it's very unclear. I guess what I want to do is to be clear about what I think we need to do next, and especially in our community. The role that we have in the integrative and functional medicine community is to create health, right? Is to really create health and to get people off a dependency on a system that doesn't really serve their interests. And people say healthcare is broken. This is actually healthcare designed the way that it being executed in the way that it was designed, which is to maximize revenue and to maximize profit, not to create health. If you had systems based on health, you would prioritize health. There would be a nationwide health campaign on the back of COVID when you saw what kind of things, who died. And if the chronically ill died, and those deaths can be transformed by different kind of operating in the world, we would have prioritized that, but we're not. And so the system is working the way that it's designed, but we need to really change the system. And for those of you who know me and have ever got an email from me, like that Bucky Fuller quote that sits on the bottom of my email has been there for 10 years, which is that we need, you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. To change things, you need to build a new system that makes the existing system obsolete. And I feel like that's what I've been doing, especially for the last 6 years. With the Functional Forum, it was a few things. One, we got to massively grow the number of people that are trained in functional medicine, the number of doctors and practitioners. We need to develop a common language for our community so that our community can communicate with itself. And why is that important? Because we need to develop practitioner teams that can reverse chronic disease. We need to, do research that show that this kind of care, outperforms care, Western medicine for chronic disease. And, I saw functional medicine, and the reason why I called my show the Functional Forum, and now I've got the new business, Find Functional, is because what I see is that functional medicine is a consistent operating system where everyone's doing it the same. And if we have a common language and we can learn to speak a common language among sort of existing, current, disparate communities, we have a chance of being together. And ultimately, I guess what I want to say is that our community in the integrative and functional medicine community needs to model unity, needs to model community, right? Community is our immunity. Kelly shared that to me here, like our community is our immunity. If we are together, we can't be separated and destroyed, right? This country at this exact moment is being separated and destroyed. And ultimately, like, I think our community has to come together to be able to showcase, what unity looks like, to put differences aside and work together for the benefit of the people that need it the most. And that's why we spent the first iteration building the numbers of practitioners that were doing functional medicine who could speak the language. Then second, popularizing concepts of ways that, this kind of care could be delivered in a completely scalable way, and that through groups. And then now looking to try and make entry points. So, ultimately what we're doing with Find Functional is just rethinking how chronic disease care should and can be organized in order to, get most people healthy and make it affordable and accessible for everyone so that insurance can eventually pay for it and everyone can have access to a type of healthcare that creates sovereign, healthy humans ready to be healthy, help each other, be in community, and to reduce the racial disparities that absolutely exist in this country and in other places all around the world. So, this week, I think I've learned a lot. I've learned that that trauma can only be healed in relationship to other people. I've learned about the ACE scoring and adverse childhood effects and events and how that affects health. And ultimately, what I envision is a new system of healthcare that is trauma-informed, that has functional medicine as the operating system, that is affordable, that is accessible, and that that brings this type of care to everyone. And the transformation that people go through when they go through this type of care is that they are now in a completely different space in themselves, in their world, and that's a future that we can all build on. So I guess I wanted to share, like, I'm not stopping, I'm not going away. I'm going to continue to do this later this year. Over the next 6 months, we are going to launch a technology to be able to have meetup groups and local chapters of practitioner communities get together and be together. And at Find Functional, we're going to continue the journey to try and work out what combination of technology, peers, coaching, accountability, and support can be delivered in such a way that we can, consistently get people healthy, bring people out of chronic disease with functional medicine as the operating system, but that these resources coming together in the right order can get vast swathes of the population healthy. And this is probably a 30-year plan, right? I'm probably in it. I'm almost 40. This is what I'm doing. And I acknowledge all the people out there that are on the same path. I think that all of us, people who are white, who are operating in this space, need to double down on our efforts to be able to bring this to more people and to make this kind of care affordable and accessible to more people. The need for this kind of support and care is absolutely crucial. We need to have health freedom, right? We need to have freedom from the oppressor. And ultimately, that's why I've had a lot of content on health freedom on my platform, because without the freedom to choose a different type of healthcare that actually creates health, it's impossible for people to participate there. So I want to take a moment to share. I appreciate everyone listening. If you're listening to this, thank you for taking time. Thank you for time to be with me. Thank you for listening to the Rogue Health Economist. Thank you for all the guests that we've had on the Rogue Health Economist up until now. And, thank you everyone, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, how you're listening, how you're, making your voice heard, how you're participating in this new world. I acknowledge the hard work that you're doing to bring us there. And I intend to be a voice and a vehicle for the transformation of human consciousness towards allowing us to live sustainably on this planet. And that means unity, peace, love in this field of transcendence. I'm 100% committed to that. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.